Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. In this video, we're talking more about the Batman. With every day passing, the Batman is getting closer and closer to us. So in this video, I just wanted to cover some more Batman news, specifically the new Movie Maker article that came out a few days ago. This article says a lot, and so basically I read through the article myself and pulled out my favorite quotes, points, and just different things from the article itself that I wanted to talk about that I thought were pretty interesting, because this article does give a decent amount away, at least much more than what other interviews and other magazines have given away before this point. And that's coming from someone who has the copy of the Empire magazine. I think this one really gave a lot about a lot of smaller details that we really didn't get touched on beforehand. And before we get into it, if you guys are new in here and you enjoy all the Batman content and want to stay up to date on all Batman content upcoming to the Batman and further down for the rest of the Matt Reeves universe, make sure that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you miss any time I upload a video or I go live. Both always same more time. Let's get into it. I quickly want to interrupt the video, and this is later in the day, the same day that I recorded this initial video, and we just got the official runtime for the Batman. So I quickly wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about it because it is nearly 3 hours long. It's 2 hours, 55 minutes, including 8 minutes of credits. So the movie itself is actually 2 hours and 47 minutes long, which makes it the second longest superhero movie of all time, I think, and the longest Batman solo movie ever. Technically, it makes it the longest Batman movie ever, but BVS, the Ultimate Edition, was 3 hours and 1 minute. But I'm counting BVS as normal Batman, so it's the longest Batman movie ever. As you can see on screen right now, the Hollywood Reporter just reported it, and it's crazy. They said right here, 8 minutes of credit, as I said before. Warner Brothers insiders did confirm this. The only theatrical superhero movie that it's behind in terms of runtime is Avengers Endgame, which is 3 hours and 1 minute long. And you guys might be saying, oh, the longest superhero movie ever is 4 hours and 2 minutes because it's Zack Snyder's Justice League. Technically, that never released in theaters, so we're saying specifically theatrical releases, the Batman is the second longest one of all time, and I'm very happy about this. This means that Warner Brothers didn't make Matt Reeves fit all this under 2 hours like they did for all the other DCEU movies. And as a Matt Reeves fan, as a Robert Pattinson fan, and as a Batman fan, this is great to hear, because later on in this video, in this article, we'll be going in depth on Matt Reeves and his creative process behind this film, and it shows how much detail he went into and how much he cares about not only the mythology of these characters, but also just the lore of Gotham as a whole. And I'm super happy that this movie is nearing 3 hours long, because we'll get to flesh as much as Matt Reeves wanted to do out in one movie. Now, I'm like 99% sure Warner Brothers definitely gave Matt Reeves a cap of 3 hours, but I'm not that worried because, for example, the first two Planet of the Apes movies were nearing 3 hours long, and they did a great job of world building and just fleshing out every single little detail possible that I think Matt Reeves can obviously do it in a 3 hour flick. But if we're being completely honest, I would have watched a 6 hour cut of this movie if I had the chance to, because it's gonna be phenomenal. But now back to what this video is mainly about, which is the new magazine regarding the Batman. So as you can see, I have the Movie Maker article pulled up on screen right here, and the title is A Detective Story to Understand Matt Reeves' The Batman, Look to the 1970s. And then we start off with this new exclusive photo that we have right here of the Batman. It looks like he's in the Riddler's cave, and he's probably looking at the other police detective that we saw in the Bat and the Cat trailer. Another thing that just stands out from this picture alone is just the white eyes. I really love what they did with the white eyes, and we had two new posters released, which are on screen right now. In the first one, the eyes really just pop out, and I love how much the eyes express emotion. We've talked about this before. This is why I'm glad they didn't go with the all white eyes. I'm glad we get to see Robert Pattinson's green and white eyes within the cowl, because it expresses just so much more emotion than a plain white mask could have. And if you zoom in, someone on Twitter noticed that there is also a Riddler logo on the inside of his eye, which is really cool to see. And then the second poster, as you see on screen right now, is the Batcat poster. It has Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne on top of some building that we've seen in the trailers a bunch of times. Out of the entire beginning of the article, the biggest thing that stood out to me was the fact that the actors had a lot of input on the film itself. And we see this right here when Matt Reeves says, the first thing that I'm doing when I'm working is I'm trying to internalize everything, because if I have it internalized, then my compass is functional, Reeves explains. So I'm trying to feel what it would be like for everybody, but I'm not in the actor that any of these people are. I'm just an actor on paper in my head and in a vision. I have an instinct about what the emotional path is. When Jeffrey comes in, he he has so many great ideas. He's an amazing actor, so he brings something to life. So the last thing I want to do is have him do it the way I would do it, because I wouldn't be nearly as good. I really do like this because it's just showing that the actors have a lot of input on the script, and I think that's always good in a movie, especially a movie that has a lot of takes. Like Pattinson said later in this article, he says the details really do matter, says Robert Pattinson, who plays Bruce Wayne and Batman, two personalities who are painfully intertwined in the Batman. Pattinson says he worried at first when Reeves would ask for a lot of takes. And then he goes on to talk about how he used to doubt himself a lot when Matt Reeves told him to do a lot of takes, and this goes back to the actors being able to tweak the script with Matt Reeves, because it shows that obviously Matt Reeves has a super passionate vision for the mythology and characters of the Batman, but at the same time he understands that he is not the actor in the situation, so giving the actors multiple takes gives them little pieces and bits of what the true character is, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm convoluting this too much, but it just seems like Matt Reeves took multiple takes of multiple versions of scripts just so that he could get the perfect version for these perfect characters at the end. The last thing that we see in this first prelude part of the article is Selina Kyle saying something really, really interesting to me. She said, especially in a film like this where it can be so easy just to focus on the big action sequences or the explosions, he'll pay attention to the way you put down a cup. This just goes back to the perfectionist side of Matt Reeves, and this is why I'm so excited for the film, because it feels like every single thing that Matt Reeves wanted in this movie is going to be happening in this movie his way, which just it elevates my excitement so much more. Now this next section I'm actually going to be skipping over. It's called Disappearing. It talks about Matt Reeves' entire backstory in filmmaking. I actually read through all of this, and it starts off in the 1950s when Matt Reeves started making films and how he met J.J. Abrams and his whole storyline basically as a creator. And so I don't want to talk specifically about that because there's not much Batman content in there, but if you are going to read this article, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's titled Disappearing. It's such a great section, and it's just not too Batman related, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But now getting to probably my favorite part of the entire article, which is the Welcome to Gotham section. There's just so much to unpack here, so if I'm reading directly off the screen this whole time, I apologize. There's just so much I need to go through. So the first thing that we see in this section is two key characters in the Batman. Gotham Mayor Don Mitchell Jr., played by Rupert Perry Jones, and District Attorney Gil Colson, played by Peter Sarsgaard, share the last names with key figures in the Watergate scandal. And then he goes on to talk about the reporters who broke the Watergate scandal and all that kind of stuff, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And even later on in the article, Matt Reeves connects Bruce Wayne, the Batman, Robert Pattinson to Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, which I really, really do love to see. It seems like obviously he's not taking direct inspiration from the events of Watergate, but more characters, political figures, and people with influence from that event, which makes me really excited because it feels like there was already a story there. He's not ripping them right from that story or right from that event, but he's taking characters from that event and forming them into how they would fit into Gotham. And this is all explained later on in the article, which I'm just going to quickly skip to. Matt Reeves said, just like Woodward and Bernstein, you've got Gordon and Batman trying to follow the clues to try to make sense of this thing in a kind of classic detective story way. I wanted bits of these names because I wanted the conspiracy to come with that forcefulness of history and believability for me, Reeves explains, hence Coulson and Mitchell. Again, he's directly ripping it from these events, but he's still just keeping the archetype of those characters. And we'll talk about archetype characters a lot because Selina Kyle and Oz are all archetype characters based on some previous character or someone that's been alive before that's had these semi-experiences, and those characters are all built from that, which I'm so excited for. I know I just keep repeating that I'm so excited, but that's what this entire article is doing for me. It's just elevating everything to a whole other level. Now, this next part of the article is by far just my favorite little tidbit, and it starts off like this. I wanted to do a story in which the corruption of Gotham was one of the most important aspects of the story because Gotham is a sick place. Bruce is desperate to try and make a change, says Reeves. He's still stuck, to be honest, emotionally stunted at 10 years old because that's trauma that you don't get past, witnessing your parents' murder in this place. He's looking to create meaning, right? This is the only meaning that he can find. I think that he imagines that if he can do this, somehow he can reverse what's happened, which can never be reversed. This is a very human impulse, right? To try and relieve something and remake it. This tidbit, like I said before, is my favorite, and I think it's because it expresses the true quest of Batman. And we'll mention this later on in the article, but they talk about how every Batman has still been pretty goofy to an extent, but this one feels like there's a true internal quest to to accomplish something in his life and just, like Matt Reeves said, reverse the damage that's been done, but in reality it can never actually be reversed, and Bruce Wayne just can't come to terms with that, which I can't wait to see that, because we've never seen the true quest of Batman. We've always seen Batman go for all these villains that are big, super crazy threat level, but this movie is 100% the Batman's perspective. It's narrated by the Batman. It's not like the villain's gonna overshadow the Batman like it did in most of the Dark Knight trilogy. And that was my biggest problem with the Dark Knight trilogy, and I think it was mainly just the villains overshadowed Batman too much. And this movie specifically, I don't know about the rest of the series, but this movie specifically, we know that Bruce is narrating, and I think that that's gonna lead to us having a more personal connection with Bruce, and this showing us the true quest of him and talking about how he's trying to do something that's literally impossible. He's never going to be able to reverse those events, but he's just trying to cope with it, and in that he believes that he can reverse it. And then after that, we see him say he's investigating these crimes. It ends up taking him in an unexpected way to something that's incredibly personal. This goes back to the true quest, this whole personality finding who he truly is. I think that's going to be the origin story that we get. We're not going to get his parents dying behind the theater in an alleyway, the pearls dropping and the gunshots. We're not going to get that. But we are going to get the origin of Batman, like the true Batman. Obviously, we have year one Batman. He's been Batman for, I think, a year and 6 months. We've already had Batman, but we've never had a true morally correct Batman within Robert Pattinson. And so I think that's what this movie is planning to do in terms of what is like this origin going to be? What at the end of the movie, what are we going to really find out about this character? I think that this personal journey is going to be our technically origin for him. And the final thing in this section that really stood out to me was what Matt Reeves said about this movie basically kind of being a horror movie. So Matt Reeves said this story is, in addition to being an almost horror movie and a thriller and an action movie at its core, it's very much a detective story. It's very narrative. So I think that this, again, number one, proves that Bruce Wayne is obviously narrating this film. And I think that it's very important that he mentioned horror and thriller. And obviously we knew it was going to be a detective noir film. That's nothing new. But this is the first time I personally heard Matt Reeves come out and directly say it's a horror and thriller film, which that just gets me even more excited, just as this whole article is. Now, again, I would recommend reading this entire article because there's a lot of talk about Robert Pattinson first meeting up with Matt Reeves and them talking about the whole detective aspect and how Robert Pattinson actually thought at first that the detective thing was just going to be a cover-up, kind of like a fake thing for the movie so that they could go dive deeper into other stuff. But when he realized that it was actually going to be a full-on detective movie, he really liked it, and that's kind of what got him even more engaged within this character. But now moving on to the next section called Follow the Money. Now, there's not a crazy amount here, but the biggest thing that I took away from this was something about Oz as well as Selina Kyle's relationship with Batman. So I'm going to start off with the Selina Kyle stuff. Matt Reeves said that Selina helps Bruce realize how much he's taken for granted. It's a very special safety net to be able to do what he's doing. Yes, okay, he's risking his life, but he's risking his life in the way that only someone who has all the resources that he has can do. He absolutely has privilege. There's no question. He was born with privilege. He's a descendant of city royalty. So I think this shows a lot about the relationship between Bat and Cat, and how Cat was basically poor her whole life, and how Selina Kyle had to go through all this adversity. And yes, again, Robert Pattinson is risking his life, or Bruce Wayne is risking his life as Batman, but he has the resources to do so. So Matt Reeves is basically saying Selina Kyle thinks that if anyone had this amount of resources, they should be a vigilante. I mean, they should be helping out the city like this. And obviously Batman's not doing it as Bruce Wayne, as we saw in the beginning of that Batcat trailer, but he's doing it in the night as the Batman. But the final thing I want to talk about from the Follow the Money section was the Godfather Connection. And we saw this in the Empire magazine, so this isn't something super brand new. But Will Ferrell did say, I think Fredo from The Godfather was a bit of a reference for the Penguin. He said whether it was psychological or intellectual, Fredo was frowned upon as less than his other brothers, and maybe Oz as well in his life was looked upon someone who wasn't capable. This is just another character archetype that I did want to mention because they talked a lot about character archetypes in the Empire magazine as well, which I really did like. Okay, so now that I'm reading this article back, they basically just said exactly what I said. Literally, it says, like Bruce Wayne, Selina Kyle has no superpowers. Both rely on their tenacity, deductive skills, and courage, but Bruce is super rich and Selina has nothing. Selina has a very difficult life and has lived on the street and is trying to survive, says Kravitz. She really knows how scary the world is is just based off of certain things that the Batman says. So you can tell he grew up wealthy. I just think the way that they're describing this whole relationship and how it's going to play out is just going to be so good on screen. I can't wait. And again, I don't have much to say about this dynamic because obviously I'm not a big comic reader for the Batman. I just got into comics. I recently started reading like Daredevil and a little bit of Doctor Strange. So hopefully I'm going to be getting to the Batman very soon. And I can't wait to see Selina Kyle and Batman's relationship in the comics after watching this movie, because I think that Matt Reeves is going to nail it, especially because even now looking at from a Selina Kyle or Catwoman fan or a Bruce Wayne fan specifically in the comics, I will say that this still sounds interesting to me. It just sounds like a great dynamic if it was in any movie at all. If this dynamic was between two different characters, I would still love it if it wasn't Bruce Wayne or Selina Kyle. So there's another section called Overlooked, and I'm not going to go over this one because there's not too much in it. They just talk about Oz and Colin Farrell and stuff like that. It's nothing that we haven't read already. It's just more elaboration on Oz and why they chose him out of the Rogues Gallery. Again, if you want to check it out, click the link in the description down below. So like I mentioned earlier in this video, the other Batman movies have some level of goofiness, and this is exactly what they talk about here. And Memory Cloth is talking about Lucius Fox in Nolan's movies and how Batman's suit in the Nolan movies are made out of memory cloth. The Batman script, Pattinson explains, finally embraces the madness. There's an element in the other iterations of the story where Bruce goes off, does his training, masters himself, then comes back to Gotham as a fully realized character in the delineation between Bruce and Batman. Now, there's no one specific quote, but it's basically like the first 5 paragraphs of this section of the article, and they literally just talk about every iteration of the Batman and what makes them like slightly goofy, even unrealistic, even the Nolan movies, which is I was most surprised about because I didn't even think of those things, and they do mention it, and I really do like that. Now, the one line that just brought all of this, like talking about all these other past Batman iterations together, in my opinion, was when Pattinson said the Batman script finally embraces the madness. Now, I might be looking too deep into it, but I do think that this, to a certain extent, does mean that this movie doesn't feel like it has to shy away from the more mythical aspects of the Batman. And by madness, I think he means that even though everything is grounded, the action and all this other higher level stuff isn't really sacrificed for it being grounded. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense, but that's the way I view it. Pattinson says there's an element of the other iterations of the story where Bruce goes off, does his training, masters himself, and comes back to Gotham as a fully realized character. And then the delineation between Bruce and Batman, the public Bruce, the private Bruce, and the Batman Bruce are very contained, and he can control them more easily. Now, what he says next is what I think he means specifically by mentioning the madness of Batman. And he goes on to say, and in this, the lines have totally blurred. His self as Bruce is sort of disintegrated. This makes me so happy. I don't know how to explain it. And I think, honestly, this shirt that I'm wearing expresses it best. Bruce Wayne does not exist, and I think that's what I love so much about it. I mean, obviously Bruce Wayne exists as a character, but within Batman, Bruce Wayne is the one that's fading away. The public Bruce is the part that's kind of fading away. The private Bruce is obviously still there, and the Batman is the most prominent part. And the fact that Robert Pattinson is mentioning 3 different personalities, that gets me so excited. I hate to be one to say this, but I love when heroes have an identity crisis. I really do. It's so cool to me how these heroes can feel like different characters within themselves, and in a film, I think that's perfect. Now, skipping forward a little bit, now Matt Reeves is basically talking about Robert Pattinson as Batman and how he wrote the script slightly tailored to him. So Matt Reeves goes on to say, that's why I was so excited about Robert Pattinson. He's such a wonderful actor, and I knew that he would be able to go on that search for me for the depth and complexity of this character. I mean, I knew he wasn't going to play him straight ahead. I started writing for him at a certain point. I had no idea if he would ever want to be in the movie in the first place. This just shows that the Batman is for Robert Pattinson, at least this iteration is. Now, Nolan's movies might not have been, the Burton movies might not have been, but this iteration is specifically for Robert Pattinson. Now, this next part, I'm just gonna read it out because I'm very petty, because I hate people who say that Robert Pattinson didn't work out, and this article directly confronts that rumor. So excuse me while I read basically this entire section out. Interest in the Batman was so high that Pattinson set off a fandom kerfluffle when he self-affectionately told GQ in an interview conducted from quarantine that he wasn't actually working out that much for the role. He said, "I think if you're working out all the time, you're part of the problem." He was being dryly funny, not that anyone noticed. That really came back to haunt me. "I just always think it's really embarrassing to talk about how you're working out," he says, laughing about it now. "I think it's like an English thing. Unless you're really in the most unbelievable shape where people are just genuinely curious going, how have you achieved like this physical perfection or whatever?" He further clarifies, "You're playing Batman. You have to work out." He laughs again. "I think I was doing the interview when I was in lockdown as well in England, so I was in lower gear for working out." It's not the first time that an offhanded comment from Pattinson has been taken too seriously. It's the same thing as saying in an interview when I was 21 years old that I didn't wash my hair, he laughs. "It just sticks for 15 years. I don't even have much to say about this. I just want to say that he worked out. So if you don't think Robert Pattinson is going to be a good Batman because he didn't work out, well, you've been corrected. He does work out, so inherently, he's a good Batman. But in all honesty, I don't think he needed to clarify this. I think if you know Robert Pattinson as an actor from his press tours and all of that, he does inherently just do dry jokes, and it might not be funny to all of us. Like, I don't think I laughed when I first read that GQ magazine. And Pattinson also goes on to talk more about the audition process and how he didn't do big budget films before this, and how Matt Reeves was scared that Pattinson wouldn't want to do it because he didn't really do big budget films after the Twilight saga and stuff like that. They go into more detail about that, so again, read the article if you want all of that. But the next section is actually called Bam Sock Pow, and I'm not going to go over that because that they specifically just talk about how they shot in isolation due to COVID and all that kind of stuff. Again, there's not much Batman content there. They talk mostly about their experiences, which I think is actually really interesting. They actually had to act through like earpieces sometimes because sometimes they couldn't have that many people on set, which is just crazy to hear. Now to get to the final section of the article called Stop. Now this is probably the weirdest part to me because there's not too much of like a structure in this section of the article. This section is literally just about one scene about Peter Sarsgaard and Zoe Kravitz having a talk like in a scene, and basically the scene just wasn't working, and so Matt Reeves had to decide whether he wanted the scene not to work right now and reshoot it 6 months later during reshoots and stuff like that, or if he just wanted to scrap the scene right now and basically just rewrite it as people were waiting on set. Even in the midst of all of the stuff going on set, Matt Reeves decided to take out the time from that shooting day and rework that section of the script just because it didn't work for one scene. People might think this is super perfectionist and, oh my god, the movie's not going to be good, like he's thinking about it too much, like it needs to just flow. It's like, no, this is his vision, and so I think this is a really good sign actually, because it shows how much he cares for the little details, and that like I mentioned in the very beginning of this video, every single part of this movie is perfectly detailed and crafted by Matt Reeves himself. But with that being said, we finally reached the end of the article. Let me know your thoughts on the entire article in the comments down below. And again, I've linked this full article in the description. Like this video and hit that subscribe button just so you don't miss out on any more Batman content before the release and after the release. I'll definitely be making theory videos, predictions, and all that kind of stuff for the Batman 2. But again, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.